Great. As you know, we have a YouTube channel. I will put in the chat the link so you can register and also to the channel to be notified when the new video will be there. Actually, this YouTube channel, let me spend a couple of words on that. It's really interesting because we recorded all the session, most of the session that we had since the start of the pandemic a couple of years ago. And so we are talking about something like 60, 70 different events that are already available in the channel on most different topics on digital, agile, facilitation, and everything, psychology. So it's starting to get really interesting. So we had a lot of speakers, a lot of interesting people that joined our community. Sure, Frederick, I will share the link in the chat for sure. So we also have a LinkedIn group, and I will put the link so you can add to this group, and it's another way to follow us, what's happening and what else. I think that this is all from my side. So again, an invitation to join all the different channels that we are on. And now I will say, Terry, you have the stage. So please.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dex. No, I'm really pleased to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me. So I'm not one for huge, long personal intros of all my credentials and history, but I will tell you a little bit about the history that I think is particularly relevant to the Transform deck, which is the thing that I'd like to show you and share with you and play with you today, because I think there are some things about it which we can only really find out by playing around with it, by looking at how it relates to your practice and some of the things that you're doing, and seeing how it might help you. So I've been in learning and development since 2000 and facilitate and designed learning for lots of organizations in lots of countries at that time, on lots of topics, and moved gradually over that period from mainly being a facilitator to mainly being a designer. Found that was very much my kind of passion and my skill set. And then even within the half of my career, which has been focused on design, is kind of also a story of two halves, because it's then ended up being more and more focused on games-based learning and gamifying learning, because I found that to be one of the most effective ways to help people learn, and certainly to situate the learner at the center of things, to make learning engaging. And lots of the tools and the ways that I've found work for doing that are drawn from games, and some of the ways that I'm sure Corrado has spoken to you about before, that we found to make games, that games are effective and that games help people to kind of get engaged with the experience and to learn things from it. So it's a little tiny bit about me. And as part of that, as part of being a games-based learning professional, one of the things that I've developed a great love for is card decks, and some of the ways in which card decks can be a really, really adaptive, really flexible tool for exploring topics and for inspiring things. I just want to give you one little anecdote, actually, that apparently is a true story, but for me kind of demonstrates, I think, the power of card decks, which is, I don't know if, how many of you know of Mendeleev, the creator, Dmitry mentioned Mendeleev, the creator of the periodic table, and how he created the periodic table, which was that he knew that there was some kind of connection between the elements. He had a kind of certainty, an inner certainty that there was a connection between all these elements, but he wasn't quite sure what that connection was. And he played around with the elements by putting each one of them on a card, and actually had these all, and he would arrange them and move them around in rows and columns and groups, one element per card, while he was on train journeys and then while he was at home, until eventually he kind of saw some of the connections and arranged them in the right kind of rows and columns by the right factors. And that became, if you like, the MVP, the original version of the periodic table. But it was only by having them as these flexible, individual kind of elements that he was able to kind of see them in different ways and play around with them and come up with new ways and improvements to what he was doing. So for me, that illustrates the power of card decks. And I've got a huge box of card decks for coaching and for creativity and inspiration. And they in themselves have inspired me in some ways to create the deck that I'm going to show you today. So I'm going to show you the deck itself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's for, what I think it can do, and a little bit about my journey of creating it. What I hope you're going to get from this is a little bit of an insight into that process, and see if there's anything that will help you and inspire you from that process. Some specific insights into the ways that this the Transform deck can help people to learn and can help to create the most effective learning processes, and some of the ways that it can do that in, I think, a way that is very much compatible with Lean Agile. And also, you know, I'm going to give you a chance to think about some of your challenges and maybe problem solve and try and get really interactive, and help you to think about and maybe come away from this session with ideas that would be, you know, better ways to do some things that you're looking to do, or some challenges that you're facing. And maybe, you know, if you see the deck as something valuable for your practice, maybe you'll go away and buy it, but that's up to you. I'd say, you know, I'm not anywhere near as much of a Lean Agile expert as I'm sure many of the people in this room are. So I will signpost some of the ways in which I think the deck is specifically relevant to you. But what I'd like is, if as we go through, you're looking for those ways yourself. And if you feel any way that I've kind of missed, that it really links in to what you're doing, it'd be great to hear your insights into that as well. So the first bit will be a little bit more of me talking, but we will definitely break out into it being much more interactive. And even when it is me doing a little bit more of the talking, I definitely like it to be quite kind of informal. If you feel like there's a question, don't feel like you have to save it for the right time or for the Q&A. Just feel free to pop it into the chat, and I'll come to it fairly presently, I'm sure. So hopefully that sounds okay in terms of what we're going to do. So I'll show you well, I'll tell you a little tiny bit more about my journey in creating the deck, and then I will get it on the screen and show it to you. So I think the kind of process of creating it is quite informative in terms of you know, some of the ways in which I was looking at my process and trying to improve that process, because I was designing learning experiences to various briefs for various clients, and finding that I was looking back over a kind of career of 20 years of doing this and saying, well, I'm sure that there are activities, engaging things for learners to do, ways for people to learn effectively that I've used in the past in various specific sessions and experiences that I'm not really drawing on, or I'm not drawing on as quickly or as easily as I could. You know, I'm sure that I'm recreating, actually reinventing certain wheels by coming up with a new version of something that maybe I've already got somewhere in a folder or a file or a session one. And I was just looking for ways to improve that process, really, to make it quicker, to make it easier to try new ideas and try and come up with new ways of helping people to learn. And so what I did was, first of all, kind of started to look back through all of those sessions that are designed for many people on many topics, and start to index them and kind of pull them out, first of all, into a Kanban board, and then later on into a spreadsheet, and just play around with indexing the different things that they did and the different ways that they help people to learn, and finding commonalities. And that tool, first of all, Kanban board, then the spreadsheet, and then it eventually evolved into a card deck, I found incredibly useful for helping me to really rapidly come up with ideas and reject some of them, but find the best ways to put together a session, to put together some which were very games-based, some of which were more traditional, but just with kind of engaging activities, hopefully, rather than people just listening. You know, by how much it helped me, I thought, okay, this is something that could potentially help other people, which from the feedback that I received, it has, but you know, you can be the judge of whether it could help you in whatever you're involved in creating a learning experiences, or you know, informally helping people to learn. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background. Really happy to answer any questions on that specifically, but I would like to get into showing you the deck, so that we can also then get into interacting and maybe hearing a little bit about some of the challenges that the deck could potentially link into of your own. So just as I'm about to show you some of the cards kind of online, just likes to keep in mind that in many ways the way in which it was originally developed was as a physical product. So you've got the kind of box of cards, and then you've got this kind of deck of cards, which I'll show you the cards and what's on each one. But just like we're talking about with Mendeleev and his periodic table cards, the idea is that you can very easily then move them around, lay them out, shuffle, and deal in various ways to inspire different ideas and to play with different possibilities. So I have developed a version that's useful to use online, which I'll talk about later. But the kind of, if you like, the primary way they were designed was that physical way. So even as I'm showing you online, maybe just keep that in mind, because I have found that a lot of people like to play with the physical version and find that really helpful. But the first thing you see when you open the box is the instructions, which are themselves on cards, because people can then move them around and work out which bit of the instructions they want to be interacting with at any given time. And the idea, as it says on the very first card, is that it's a way to transform your learning content into engaging activities. And that transformation is the heart of it, really. That you may have a piece of learning content. And again, learning content could be in a very formal sense or a really informal sense. You just want to communicate an idea to somebody. And your most kind of standard, boring way to do it might be just to pop it up on a slide and talk through it and hope they get it. So anything that transforms it into something a little bit more engaging is what this deck is trying to inspire you to explore, experiment with, and hopefully settle on some way that works for your content, for your audience. So each card has a front and a back. That's the front of the very first card. The card goes on to talk about different ways, but I'm going to show you some of those ways actually. So I won't kind of talk at too much length there about what that first card says. But the intro cards, these grey bordered cards, are all about how to play with the deck. And I'm going to come back to some of those, because I think actually before I go too much further into the how to, you might like to look at the cards themselves. So most of the cards in the deck, there's 45 of these coloured cards, look like this. They have on the front the kind of category or name of the type of activity, the suit that it's in and a number, and then description of the activity. So this one's a nice and simple one. Most of the blue ones are fairly simple. I'll come back to that. But pros and cons. So learners, think about and list the pros and cons of various options. So some of these I'm sure you're going to be familiar with, because there are things that you may well have done as part of your sprints. But these, they're focused on thinking about how they can help people to learn. So a little bit of a why there on the front of the card as well. And also these numbers, which I'm going to come back to, they're ways of linking some of the cards together. So on the front, you got enough to tell you what the card's kind of about and why you might want to use it. And then on the back of each card, an example of it in practice, so that people get a flavour of how it might look if someone was really using it. And then some tips for if you're going to use that in a learning experience, then to think about how to get the best from it. So in a way, it's just that idea repeated 45 times is the core of the deck. Just one thing to say about each card deck is it's in many ways a category of ideas. So like I was saying, when I was bringing things together, each card is not a specific activity that's kind of mapped out and it's only run this one way. It's a whole bunch of activities it could be, but this is the kind of card that represents them. So any way that you potentially could use the pros and cons is represented by this card. So again, I'm just watching the chat in case any questions do come in, so do feel free to jump them in at any point during this. And as I say, I will definitely make it more explicitly interactive later, but just trying to help you to understand how the deck works and what it's all about. So that's the basic card, that's the front and the back. And how would you use that then to transform learning? I think it's probably the next question. So if you had a topic, and again, really topic agnostic, the deck, absolutely you could use it for anything that you want to help people learn in any context potentially. But if you imagine a session on management and leadership styles, so you're talking to people about different ways that they might want to manage and lead people, perhaps you have a preferred style, or perhaps you're looking at a model like Myers-Briggs or something like that, or something with different styles, and you're saying to people, okay, let's explore this more and let's learn about them. So here's two cards that could help you to do that. Just as an example, if you pulled out the populate the model card, and again, I'm just going to talk about these at a surface level. I'm not going to show you the backs of these cards. I'm just helping to see how a card could spark an idea. But populate the model is about learners populating a visual representation of a model with examples, which again, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that in other contexts. But, if you've got management leadership styles, perhaps get examples of leaders from real life or from your organization and say, okay, where do these people fit? Do they fit in this quadrant or this quadrant, if you've got a 4-box model of styles, for instance, and use that as a way to explore and learn about that model. Or customize an avatar, so that's drawn from the way in which, in games, people often do spend a lot of time customizing their avatar and making it really like them and making it represent them. And perhaps you could do that, and the back of this card does have various suggestions on how you could do that physically or digitally. But find different ways for people to customize a character so that it represents who they are as a leader, or do the same for all of the different styles in whichever model of leadership you're using. And hopefully, you're hearing there in some of the ways that I'm talking about that, the fact that it could be any model of leadership styles. The key is then to take that content, whatever it is, and transform it into not just talking about it, but doing things with it. So that's just hopefully a couple of examples using a single card. And that's, if that's the only way that anybody uses the deck, then you've definitely got 45 different ways that you could sift through and work out, okay, which of these is most appropriate to try and help people to take in this learning content and to engage with it. But there are other ways to play with the deck and to use it other than just focusing on one card at a time. So in a way that this is where we come back to the grey cards, the how-to cards. And in a way, what we've just done there is kind of the first of those beyond the initial instruction card. Pick a card, so you could just choose a card at random or choose it in some other way and consider how that could be used. But you can also use combinations. So you can look for 2 cards that combine to transform one activity, for instance. So I'll just go to a couple of examples of that. So if, for example, you're wanting people to learn about a methodology for rating risks and for mitigating those risks, if that was your topic, then here's a couple of cards that could combine together. So the branching paths card is asking learners to navigate a scenario stage by stage and having choices, and then those choices making a difference to what they encounter at the next stage. Any of you who are involved in kind of e-learning design are probably familiar with that kind of scenario navigation. So, combining that with a second card, storytelling, learners create a story around relevant prompts that you supply, could mean that you're asking them to make technical choices about a scenario and say, okay, would you rate the risk at this level or this level? And would you mitigate it in this way or this way, branching their paths? But you're then also asking them to tell a story about that, because in fact, when you ask people to learn about risk, it can be very cold and clinical unless you actually bring a story in there of Bob, who's taking a really dangerous risk and has some quite serious personal consequences, and so on and so forth. So again, just one example there of how you could do that, or another one for the same topic could be taking the critique and example card, where learners critique a real life example, a video, an image, or a text. And then the matching card, which is where learners match cases with categories, or halves with their missing other halves, or things with other things. So combining those two could be a critique an example of somebody not treating a risk correctly, not rating and mitigating it correctly, and highlighting where they've gone wrong, and then perhaps matching the fix into each of those problem areas. What's the fix for problem area A and problem area B, and so on and so forth. So just a simple way there. And again, blue cards often do end up quite simple ways of doing things, but it's good to have those in there as well. So that's a couple of ways of combos, and just this as well, mention actually on the cards there you have the numbers, which are ways to see which combinations are likely to work, because it's a kind of almost like a links thing where card 3, 10, 12, 23, etc. Are the cards that I think work quite well, that I found work well with this one. So just suggestions, just a way to kind of start to find new things, new paths that you might want to explore. If you like the idea of this one and want to find the cards that it combines with, then you can explore these 6 cards by number. So that's combinations. Just a great question, Mike. Can you link more than 2 cards for one activity? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've got a complex activity, particularly if it has stages, particularly if you're asking them to do one thing and then another, then there's no limit really to the number of stages that you might use. I can certainly illustrate shortly kind of an activity that I've built that combines kind of 5 or more. But yeah, there's definitely no limit to that. I mean, it gets more and more complex, which is something you'd want to think about. Complexity is something that you need those people to deal with, your learners, and there's a value to simplicity, but absolutely. Good stuff. So there's combos, and I'll just talk briefly about one of the, so again, the grey cards telling us different ways to play with things. The other ones that I'll explore at any real depth at this point is just the suits, and then I'll just mention some of the other ways, but perhaps we won't explore those unless we get a question taking us down that road. So suits is the way that I've kind of arranged the cards. So you've got 45 cards, and if it were just numbered 1 to 45, that could be a bit confusing. They're arranged into 5 suits, so you won't be able to see all of them here. I've just zoomed out so that you can see the different colors. So you've got the blue suit, which is assess, which is all about asking your learners to assess and evaluate and use their judgment. You've got the green suit, which is arrange, which is all about asking the learners to look at arrangements and think about how things relate to each other, models, systems, processes. You've got the red cards, which are create, which are all about making your learners create things, use their creativity. You've got the purple ones, which are solve, which are all about solving problems or trying to get the best possible result given a set of parameters. Games often come into that category, game-like things. And then you've got the orange, which is apply, which is all about practical application of skills and ideas. So just a way to kind of divide up the deck a little bit, but it also gives you another way to focus in on certain cards. So for instance, if you thought that one of those was particularly relevant, then you could just really zoom in on that suit. So if I zoom in now on the green suit, which is all about arrange.
Sorry, Terry, just a quick question, because I think it's relevant for the rest.
Please,
from Hume, that is asking if they are existing also in virtual version of the card. No?
Yeah, I see him. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, so I'll tell you what, I'll finish talking about the suit and then I'll go to that question if that's okay, because I think that'll be a good place to do that. So yeah, I will definitely come to that in 1 second. So just on going to the green suit, the assess, you could absolutely have something like a process. You want to try, it could be a process for anything at all, and you could say, well, a process that's kind of arranging things, moving through it. Let's look at that. And there's different cards there. So if it was a process for taking someone through a management procedure, performance management, then you might look at how you could customize that process to adapt it to suit different individuals. That's one activity there. Or map a journey of somebody through that process and think about how they're feeling at different stages of it. Or you could use the order the steps card, which is just about giving them the jumbled up steps to begin with and asking them to work out what the correct order is. Or you could use break the model, which is about saying, okay, which situations might this model not quite work for and what exceptions do we need to make, and things like that. So again, not just giving you a little flavor there, and then we can it's just different ways to sift the cards in many ways. So there's a really good question there then about the printing. So as you probably noticed there, as I'm kind of zooming in, zooming out, and kind of moving around, because there's so much information on each card, you've got the front and the back, and then you've got 45 cards, it can get a little bit unwieldy if you're using the whole card there. If you're trying to zoom in and zoom out and get all of that information on a kind of virtual desktop like Mural or whatever, however you're using them, get a little bit unwieldy. So what the but that information, I think, is the right amount of information, because try to balance, on the one hand, I don't want to put too much information on the cards because I don't want to lock them down and make it into this is the exact activity. It wants to be open-ended so it can inspire lots of different permutations on that activity. On the other hand, it has to be enough information to help people to understand the core of that category, so they don't think, well, I don't understand what this is about. So it's trying to balance those two things. But it does mean that in a digital sense, it's quite difficult to navigate around that whole canvas and use them in a kind of flexible way. So with physical cards, that can be quite easy, because you can definitely move them around, put a pile of the ones you don't want, and then focus and look around your whole desktop. And that is the kind of core version of the cards. It's a physical printed deck that you can buy, and I'll tell you how to buy that. But one option on buying that gives you access to these, which are the digital mini version of the cards. Now, these don't give you any of that extra information. So if you didn't know what they all meant, and if you didn't have the cards there as a reference, then you might not get, definitely wouldn't get the full kind of benefit of all of the information that backs each card and all the depth that there is to each of the categories. But if you either have these as a reference to refer to, or if you've internalized a lot of that information, then these then become something that you can move around very easily, play with online in a kind of quite flexible way, and with other people. So you've got that flexible digital use with the digital minis, is what these are called. But anytime you're thinking, hang on, what did number 16 mean again? You can look that up in your reference, which is the physical cards. Does that make sense? Cool. So go back to these for now. So just briefly, I'll go back to the other grade cards there. So I'm not going to go through these unless people have a question or want me to, because we've got plenty of time and I want to make the body of this session very flexible and interactive. So I'm very happy to, but again, I'm not going to bombard you with all of the information up front. So three other ways to use the cards, as well as the ones we've seen, are by theme. So theme is another way of grouping the card different to a suit. So the deck comes with a number of themes. So unusual or new activities, or activities that usually help around people skills or that are quite playful, and so on. And there are more and more themes which I'm releasing as content. So again, one option for buying the deck is to also buy membership of the community. And if you're part of that community forum, then you get content every week, including these themes and other ideas around the cards. So yeah, some themes there and new ones coming out all the time. The play as a game. So, as it says on the tin, really, there's some rules there, which is, in many ways a kind of version of, a bastardized version of a couple of different card games. But yeah, a way to kind of force you to play certain cards and think about cards in a way that creativity techniques often do. And thereby, by playing the game, maybe spark ideas that you wouldn't have come up with just by leafing through the deck. And then a spread is another way to play with the deck, where you take a learning theory. So some of you may be familiar with Kolb's cycle of learning, which says that we often go through 4 stages in learning. We have an experience, which we call do. We reflect on that experience. Then we learn or form rules, and then we test those rules. And if you've got those 4 as things that happen in a learning journey, you can start to just put cards at each of those 4 positions. You can say, what are we going to do to help people have each of those 4 stages to their learning journey? So that's just another way to, and that's just one example of one model. Any model or idea of learning, or any process really, you can place these into the steps of the process. So hopefully that's made sense in terms of the just a quick whirlwind tour of the deck. So for any of you who are specifically involved in kind of creating learning experiences, that's a big part of what you do. I'm sure that it'll be suggesting ways to you already how it can be useful to you. I'll say a few words about other ways that I kind of thought of in the run up to this session about how it might be relevant to some of your practice, but I'd be interested to hear if you have other thoughts as well. I think in terms of kind of agile creation of any kind of learning or coaching, the idea with this, and certainly what the feedback that I've got from people who've used it and the way I've found it, is that it really helps to generate ideas really quickly, to prototype really quickly, to try something out and then go back to the drawing board and try something else out. So that's one way, I think. Second way perhaps is that the learning itself is perhaps in tune with some kind of Lean Agile principles. So the learning that the cards encourage, this engaging activity-led learning, is coaching rather than dictating. It's empowering. It's that kind of stuff. So whether your topic is perhaps something that's required by a process change or a new flow, or whether it's about Lean Agile itself, or whether it's on some other topic, the learning itself is perhaps more in tune with some of those principles. And then kind of as an adjunct of that one, it's potentially better learning for your Lean Agile training, Lean Agile coaching, more effective rather than a sage on a stage, getting people to learn about things in ways that make the learning stick. So those are just the ones that I thought of. I'm going to pause and hopefully before we go into the specifically more interactive bit, where I'm going to maybe ask for some of your perhaps challenges and see if we can together come up with some ways to help the cards meet those challenges. See if you've got any other suggestions for how this kind of meets with your practice or could kind of complement it, and B, any questions at all at this point.
Yeah, I think cards are fantastic. I have a couple of decks myself. Come off Brian Eno being one.
Yes, Oblique Strategies. I love that deck.
And what I like about the quick games is that they take you out of the normal mundanity of work and they let you into a flow cycle, which is extremely good for mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get into the concentration, you come off it, go back in, and you're activating a whole bunch of different brain patterns and releasing different neurochemistry into the bloodstream. And it brings you back into work feeling a little bit more uplifted.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great insight, Zach. I think definitely, there's a kind of pushes you forward sometimes when you might get stuck otherwise, and helps you with that flow, definitely. Yeah.
The other thing we do is encourage people to use card decks like this and create lean scenes. So in Agile, everybody's familiar with a user story because it's addressing the user needs. But Agile is now so mature that a lot of people are turning it internally to look at the company and to make the difference between what's on the outside, which is your product that you're shipping out, and having a look at your processes.
Yeah.
You use a lean scene. And that, again, is another area where cards can come in, because you would be looking at teams, operations, strategy. So to be able to see it from different perspectives is really useful. I like it. Like it a lot.
Good stuff. Thank you, Zach. Excellent. Yeah, and I do think that kind of internal angle as well. I think this is one of the things about the deck. So I intended it for a very specific purpose, which is to help people design better learning experiences. But actually, people have started to feed back to me all the different ways that they've been using the deck, and including, their own personal learning and, turning it on their own processes and all kinds of things. Yeah. Excellent. Any other questions or any other insights from me about ways that you think this could connect to your practice?
Thank you, Zach, for your comment. Any other question from Terry? Well, actually, I have a question, Terry. It's about practice. Did you already use this deck in your session with some real case that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to clarify there, that in terms of using it in a session, the only sessions that I would anticipate it being used in is a kind of train the trainer kind of scenario, where actually the people in your session are themselves designing learning, or certainly involved in that kind of thinking about how the learning is going to happen kind of process. Although, be open to thinking about that. As part of the community discussions for the people who join the community on this, though, we have definitely kind of got together and used the cards, or kind of shared ways in which cards have been used. Let me just call up actually a couple of activities that I've designed, and I kind of picked out the cards. Just different. 1 second. Yeah. So here we go. So just a couple of activities, and this actually also speaks to the point where somebody was saying, I think it was Mike was asking about, could use more than one card for an activity. So a couple of activities that I've designed using these. So the hook, just briefly, and again, I'll go into more depth if people want a little bit more depth, but hawks and doves is an activity where you're asking people to look at different ways to manage people situations by kind of imagining two opposing positions, extreme positions, that of hawk and that of dove. You know, a hawk sorts people out and tells it like it is, and, you know, swoops in there and you know, is very dominant. Whereas a dove kind of tries to smooth everything over and is very peaceful and conflict averse and all of those kind of things. So you're asking learners to combine three things really in this. First of all, a role play where they actually play a scenario where they're managing someone's performance based on hawkish behavior and separately based on dove-like behavior. And in a way that's doing one of the other cards, which is tricked wrong, where you kind of trick people in some way or another. So it's kind of light tricking into wrong behavior so that you can talk about that wrong behavior. So you trick them into this kind of hawkish or dove-like behavior, and therefore give yourself a basis on which to talk about it. And then the place on a scale card is all about opening up a scale so that you can work out where the right point on that scale is that you want to be. So that's combining that into that afterwards discussion, the debrief, where you're saying, you know, okay, so we've opened up the scale between hawk and dove. Where was the right point, and where might be the right point in your own lives and own situations? So that's one activity. Or another one is a kind of game, design talent management game, where, I don't know if some people may be familiar with the 9-box grid for talent management, where you start to look at people's potential versus their performance. And you can kind of create a literal kind of grid of 9 squares with that, which is kind of asking people to populate the model with members of a team, an imaginary team, and say where they think they sit in terms of those 2 factors. And kind of at the same time, they're kind of matching that, but also matching different solutions. Okay, so what would they do with this person to get them to a better place on the grid? But they can't do all of those solutions. They have to divide up their points, which makes them judge and think more carefully about what they want to do. And then off the back of that, brainstorm things that are perhaps outside of the game, but which they could add in there to make it, you know, if for their real life situation. And the whole really is a kind of mini sim where you're doing a miniature simulation of a much larger thing. So I'll just stop at those 2 unless somebody's really curious about WordGrid. But hopefully that's kind of giving you an illustration, Dex. Was that what you're asking? Is that what you're looking for? Corrado, you're on mute there. Cool, excellent. Question from Hum. Do you populate cards or only choose from available pre-filled decks? I'm not quite sure I understand that question, Hum. Do you want to unmute perhaps and just clarify a little tiny bit? If that's okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, it's do you fill the entries out, or do you just subscribe to what's available that's pre-printed? And
oh, sure. Okay, yeah. So the deck is 45 cards, which are really the products, as I was kind of saying earlier, of my learning and design career. You know, and then of trying to kind of formulate those into some kind of archetypes or categories. So they are printed, they're if you like, kind of set. But the way they're designed, the idea is to inspire lots and lots of different combinations or variations. So, you know, although you might be using only one of only 45 cards, you know, certainly when you start to think in terms of combinations, like I was just showing, you know, the number of combinations are limitless. And even if you're just looking at one card, the different ways of using it are quite varied. You know, for instance, just looking at the ones on the screen, customize the process can be about literally customizing and changing it to suit different situations. Or it can just be about annotating it with notes and saying, okay, what kind of questions do we have about this thing? You know, so there's lots of different activities under that one umbrella or that one banner, if that makes sense. And there is a deck two. There is a deck 2 planned as well. So as well as these 45, there will eventually be another 45 to be added.
well, thank you for clarifying that. I was just thinking more along the lines, because you presented the periodic table, and I was thinking of a friend who teaches chemistry, and if there's something like a version of that that can be applied towards other learning formats for learning a language, perhaps?
I mean, I think that the number of topics that you could use this with is unlimited. I think if you were learning a language, certainly not all of the 45 would necessarily be applicable, but absolutely you could sift through this and find cards which could help you to learn a language or learn a certain element of a language, whether that's, conjugating verbs or, vocabulary or whatever. In a way, that's what the themes are kind of about, is to say, okay, the suits are one way to divide up the cards and say, okay, the learners are evaluating or they're thinking about application. But these are other ways to divide up the themes there. And certainly any of those could be any topic, like languages or like sciences. Yeah, absolutely.
Or literature, perhaps.
Literature,
Let's say Shakespeare.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we could take that as one of the challenges in a sec if you want to. Certainly, if we don't get any more job-based ones, we could look at that. But we could start to think about that. Or let's just do that as a little bit of a kind of a fun exercise, perhaps. If you're wanting people to learn a little bit about Shakespeare, I could start to sift through this and say, well, we could get some Shakespeare quotes and ask them to choose one and say, why does that one resonate with you? What does that quote say? How does that reach out and speak to you, for instance? Or we could start to map a Shakespeare novel and say, okay, what are all the connections and the different emotional and physical connections between the characters in that story? Sorry, not novel, play. Or we could start to think about, I mean, he's already telling a story, but you could think about telling the story in between the story, a little bit like, I don't know if you're aware of the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Tells the story of two of the characters in Hamlet when they're off stage. And you could get them to do something based on that, for instance. Just a couple of thoughts there. Excellent. Any other questions before we maybe just move into a section where we're starting to think about, in a similar way to how we did there with Shakespeare, actually, but hopefully for now, for some of your challenges. Any other questions or any other comments on how this relates to your practice? Excellent. Okay, so I think what would be really good to kind of demonstrate how this can work, make you think about it a little bit more, and hopefully to give you a real tangible benefit from this session as well, potentially, is if anybody has a challenge right now for what might, very formally be classed as learning design, but you don't have to be a learning designer or think of it as learning design. Any challenge that you have where you're thinking, what's the best way to help people learn or develop these skills, or perhaps even just change their ways. And perhaps we could take that challenge and see, okay, how could we use the ideas on these cards to find different ways and perhaps a best way to meet that challenge. So if you have a think, and if you have a challenge, feel free to either drop it into the chat or to just unmute yourself and tell me. And we'll see if we can work with the cards as a group. I'll lead it, but perhaps you can come in with ideas yourselves as well. And we'll see what we can do. Frederick, is that yes saying you do have one that you'd like to share with us?
Sure.
Yeah. Great.
So I'm at the client right now that I started an Agile at Scale initiative. If people cringe already, it makes sense. We are about to launch the first program that will actively involve people from the business. Actually, not completely the business, it's the finance function.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to have a training a few weeks ago, and it was called training, and I asked the question of, will we have a kickoff as well? Anyway, things sailed through, the training was pushed, and we thought, oh, that is a good sign. It means that they want to involve the executives and so on. No, the train has already left the station. They've already had a first MVP demo. and they work in the old ways. And the training was initially designed as to explain what Agile is and sell Agile. Not something I would like to do, but that's how it was presented. And so we're now in a situation where we have people from the business, people from IT. We have people who have been starting the new initiative that was, in the mind of a few, supposed to demonstrate how we could work in Agile, but they've started in all the old ways. You can see elements in the backlog that are merely tasks and so on. And we have vastly divergent views, but people are not conscious of it.
Sure.
Is it good enough a setting? Do you want also an intention?
No, that's great. I might ask you a couple of specific questions, but I think that sounds great. So just to clarify and try and get us focused on something that we can try and use the cards for. So your kind of challenge now is to implement something in some learning that will help them move from doing things the old way to understanding the best way and to doing it that way.
I would say understanding the best way. I would probably not be the only one to say that would be presumptuous, because Agile is a journey of discovery, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say if at the beginning I had the doubt on, I wanted learning, but I didn't want necessarily teaching, and we don't need teaching for learning. Now I have even more reasons to de-emphasize the teaching and to find other ways of learning and co-creating and so on.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Okay, let's have a go with that. And do you have any idea of kind of format or location? Is this going to be, you're actually going to get time with them face to face, or is it something you're going to be asking them to do for themselves? Or
so at this point we have a committed time of 10 sessions, 1 of 3 hours, 9 of 90 minutes.
Okay.
The first session should involve the executives, but they're the kind of organization that is only flat by the fact that they can put all the layers on one sheet.
Sure.
You know? So I don't know exactly whether we will get everyone. And after that, it will be mostly the teams doing the work and the counterparts of these people. Did I lose Terry, or is it everyone?
Frederick, you killed Terry. Hopefully we'll be able to join back.
We can give him a few minutes.
Let's wait for 1 second. Actually, during the session, we have 3-5 moments where he froze for a couple of seconds, but well. However, good question, Frederick. Okay, let me fill the gap. In the meantime, that Terry will be able to join back. That's a good question.
And I have a question for Frederick, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand, what is your role in this scenario?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
So I am one of 3 Agile coaches. And because of all the work that I've done with business more than IT, I was supposed to help bring the business and IT together, starting with listening. But time has passed and there's been no listening, because in order to listen, you need to have a talk. And when you are in the offices of your clients, it's obvious. You come with a cup of coffee or with a smile and it works. But when you need to set up an appointment, because this is virtual, it may not be very hard, but this is not necessarily something that I mastered so far. And the main counterpart had a concern with talking with people before the training. He wanted a big event. whereas I tend to want no event, because event is pressure for nothing. It's better to have a flow. So you could say that I'm one of 3 coaches, and probably the one that will make sure that the finance function sees the point of all this and not just see this as acrobatics from IT.
Okay.
So sorry about my connection falling over. I am back now. So I'll get stuck into getting interactive with Frederick's problem. I will just say, we'll only go as far as just generating ideas. We certainly won't kind of necessarily try and say which is the best, but just try and see how those ideas could get generated. And I can see there are, a couple of other ideas, at least from Corrado. So if you've got other ideas of topics or content yourself, please feel to drop them in the chat or to explain yours after we've had a little look at Frederick's, and we'll try and get through more than just one. So what I'll do, and this is again where you probably would note now that it would be quite difficult to work online in this collaborative way using the whole cards, because we'd have to be zooming in and out and moving up and down. But if we go to the digital minis, then we can zoom in on the cards. You will only have the titles to work from. So when I ask you to get engaged in this and think of your ideas yourself, you won't have all of that extra benefit of having the card in front of you and seeing what exactly the card really means by its title. All you have is its title and its suit. So, keep that in mind, that when you've got the cards themselves and you've got the depth of them, you'll be able to do even more. But even just from the titles, and from me being able to reference and answer questions about what that one means or what that one means, and giving ideas, I'm sure we can come up with some ideas and get a feel for how it might play. So for your scenario, Frederick, we're talking about getting these people, potentially you've got some time face-to-face with them. We want to do something that's not, there's learning over teaching, that's helping them to perhaps let go of some of the old ways and explore for themselves what might be better about some of the agile friendly ways of doing what they're doing. So by all means, anybody, verbally or in the chat, feel free to jump in with any way that just taking these cards at face value, just taking their titles, you can think that we might be able to do that. I'll just kick us off with a couple that I can think of, obviously knowing what I know about the cards. But I could certainly think, for instance, of using break the model, which is about taking something and giving, so almost setting as a challenge, let's try and break it. So actually saying to them, let's look at what you're doing, perhaps combining it with process or systems map, and map what you're doing right now, and now let's try and break it. Let's see what's wrong with it. Let's see where it falls down, perhaps as you feed certain scenarios through it, or perhaps in general. And then maybe you can start to drop in potential new ways of doing things as an answer to those breaking points. So that's one way that I could see right away. Perhaps another might be to give them a little bit of ownership of potential new ways of doing things. So share the pieces is about kind of saying, okay, here's a piece for you, here's a piece of you, and here's a piece for you. And you've got just enough information that, you can understand your piece, but not maybe how it fits in with the whole. And by sharing it and, seeing how it interacts with the pieces that we've given to other people in the room, maybe you can build something and you can feel that it's yours, that you've built it. It's not something we pushed at you and made you kind of comply with. So that's just a couple of quick ideas off the top of my head. I can see some coming into the chat as well. So Alina's saying pros and cons. Ask them to come up with those for this new way of working. Absolutely. So yeah, what are the pros and cons of doing it this way rather than that way? And again, straight away, it's their ideas about it. Storyboard, absolutely Disney style. Storyboard is all about trying to imagine and depict, as far as their drawing skills or whatever software or whatever allow, how it might look, how it does look, how it might look, comparing the two.
If I may, what
yes,
you do with Disney style, it's like a Disney movie. If you watch it in a family, you've got bits where the pre-teens laugh, bits where the teens laugh, then they go gulp because the dark night of the soul life passage is coming, and the adults look at it and laugh with nostalgia. And when you transfer that to business, the C-suite are like the parents, the middle managers are like the teenagers, and the teams are like the pre-teens. So you can get them to waft a story together with the 3 elements in it.
Fantastic, yeah.
There's techniques that you can use to measure before and after for these to go through. So you can say, come up with a story, and if it takes more than 2 to 3 weeks, you measure it at various points and measure your outcomes at the end.
Excellent. Really like that. And in a way, you're taking some of the elements that we were talking about earlier of like pushing people to, to inspiring people by giving them a structure to work into or giving them beats to work into.
Indeed. And with the cartoon element, you're taking people away from the hard reality of business, but you're not taking them up into Brechtian theatre. So we've got ways where you can do that, where you change the whole of society, which you don't want to do at the moment.
Sure. And then we've got Chris as well with a Premortem. Yeah, I think absolutely, Chris. Does Premortem have any legs in getting to root? Yeah, I think so. Let's imagine, or not let's imagine, you're there, it's happened, it's all gone wrong. Why did it go wrong? And trace the roots back to perhaps the fact that they didn't change X or Y of the old ways. Yeah. Frederic, you're unmuted there. Do you want to comment on something, or do you have an idea of your own?
So actually, related to Premortem, we wanted to do something called a future perspective, which is kind of a positive way of Premortem. I was interested in action planning, because you've all gone to events and it usually goes this way, yoo-hoo! And the goal that we have is to catch it before it. So finishing with some action planning where we get some sort of commitments, and they don't see this as the end of something, but the beginning of a chapter. I was unfortunately disturbed by my Disney watching 4-year-old when you described the Disney technique. So Zach, I'll probably contact you on LinkedIn to follow up if you don't mind. I'm interested in actually critiquing an example.
Sure.
And but I was wondering whether we could actually mix cards and, for instance, have a little bit like in liberating structures, where you have what I need from you. We could actually ask people to reverse roles and to see how things go, and to criticize it this way, in kind of the Fool's Day, where the nobles were becoming the peasants.
I see. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, interesting. I'm just wondering if that kind of
that
even
ties
fits
in,
with the card.
Yeah, that ties into servant leadership, where the leaders become the servants.
And it becomes
something
particularly important, as you said. Thank you for raising servant leadership, Zach, because this organization is a set of several consulting firms that are stacked together. And so they are the type of flat that has 7 to 8 levels. And it will be interesting. I cannot judge yet because I haven't met a leader before I was one. So it will be interesting to see what kind of conversation we can have there. Because if it happens, it's absolutely their intention. It's just the habit of the culture might prevent that.
But maybe that is a combination of critiquing an example and a kind of role play, but in a way that just shows you how varied some of the cards could be, because it's not what you would first come to mind with role play. Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. I think there's some great stuff coming out there. It sounds to me. Hopefully, it sounds some of that this could be interesting to you, Frederic.
That works great. I mean, frankly, I didn't want to put you the pressure to save my career in this program, but I thought it was precise enough and current enough that it could be a good start for a conversation.
Great. So maybe we could turn to at least one more, maybe a couple if we get time. If somebody had another example, I see that Corrado's put a couple in there, and we could definitely go with Corrado's examples of teaching good estimation, story points, or prioritization. But if anybody else had something that was more specific and personal, we could certainly go with those as well. Corey, did you want to maybe, unless somebody else did want to jump in, Corey, did you maybe just want to say a tiny bit more about what you meant by those two?
Well, these are two typical topics, actually, that I used to manage with some training session. And they are exactly a training session. We used to play games, clearly, to make this more, to bring them to life. But actually, good estimation, it's another topic for new teams. So you have to explain, I don't want to enter in the details, but I mean, there are some rules that you should follow in some way. Okay, there are some good practice that you can follow. There are bad examples that actually you should avoid. So these are typical situation in estimation. Prioritization, it's another topic that is not for the developers, but for business guys. So it's a different population. Because I mean, from the business, I don't know, Frederick, your experience, but in my teams, the business want to do everything now. So actually, they are not able to create a strong prioritization just to reduce the amount, I mean, to sequence the work, okay, in some way, because clearly we have no teams with infinite capacity, okay? And this is, sometimes it's not easy to explain to business guys, okay? So you have to make really training session. Apparently, it seems to be a stupid topic, but it's very, I mean, my experience, it's quite often happening. Okay.
I think that's a great one. And I think it's probably one that a lot of people will be able to relate to, because even if it's not your specialty area, everyone, you know, had to prioritize and has probably come across ways of prioritizing. So maybe let's think about that one for a moment, just as a nice one that perhaps anyone could get their teeth into. So again, you know, do feel free to either come off mute or contribute your own ideas in the chat. But again, I'll just kick us off with a couple of thoughts that I would have straight away about using some of these ideas to help people learn about ways to prioritize. So straight away, I might start to think about some of the things in the purple suit, the solve, where we are giving them kind of parameters or rules or so on. So we might have a branching path scenario where we're asking them to choose, and then they have to suffer the consequences of those choices about what they're prioritized and hopefully learn from that. Or another way of forcing people to prioritize is by placing values on things and creating a market. So a trading game could really get at that and say, okay, you know, based on the choices you make, you buy this resource or you choose this thing, it goes up in value the more people choose it. So you're implicitly prioritizing and then seeing what that does to the market and playing around with that. There's only the start of an idea. You need to define the parameters to make it really kind of sing, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Chris came up with the same idea. Sorry, stole your thunder there, Chris. Feel free to say if you had a different idea of how that might work. But yeah, ranking, Zach. Yeah, I mean, ranking jumps out, doesn't it? You know, rank these things. What are your priorities? I think ranking can work really well sometimes when you get different people and then compare their ranks and see, okay, why did you put it higher than these people? Matching, Corrado. What are we matching? Matching what to what?
Well, matching, it's again, think about the example of story pointing. Actually, one of the technique, the best practice is to match the new story that you are trying to estimate with something that you have done in the past.
Yeah.
So this is an exercise at team level, because there are some conversations. This is similar, this is not, it's more complex for that, because it's quite uncommon to have exactly the same story happening. Okay, so there are some, let me say, stretch to find similarities, and clearly in this stretch, you can identify the gaps that actually are between the team members. So matching could be a good exercise, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, good. And then we've got identify with one for Hippo. Zach, tell us a bit about how you're thinking that working.
Hippo is the highest paid person's opinion.
Yeah.
So if you've got the boss and he says we're doing it that way, then people tend to do it that way.
Yeah.
It's more likely to occur in a smaller company than a lot. Well, sometimes in a large company, yeah.
Yeah. So using identify with one as a way to kind of simulate that, are you saying?
No, what you do is you go and get the boss,
All
and
right.
then you tell him to tell people what has to happen,
Yeah.
and
Great.
then they do it. Is when you don't have the authority over peers. So you got to play a little bit of politics there, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Good. Like it. And Frederick's got a nice combo there, like debate, then quest, then map, then all the steps, then role play with prompts. Fantastic. Yeah, you can just chip one into another, can't you? Yeah, debate, which is the best of these to do. Where do they quest after the debate, Frederick?
So the point to me is that a lot of these things like ranking, trading game, vote contests, they're about the mechanics of prioritizing. But ultimately, as Corrado said at the beginning, if there's not trust in IT from the business, they'll want everything now because they won't trust they'll get anything later. So to me, I would have a debate around this in a fishbowl manner, where we have some people from IT, some people from the business, and we talk about some of these issues and we capture them. And the point is not to win, but there is a method I used often when I was at Deloitte and KPMG, and essentially I was working at us not getting sued. It was called putting people on the same side of the table. So as you do the debate, then you have people who take all the points that are set by both points and give a sense of the range of things that are hard on both sides. And then the question is, how can we handle the monsters we knew and the monsters we just heard about? And that will mean, how can we achieve all that? But at some point you get a map that is way too big, that you're not going to do all of this in one day, everybody knows. So then you can do the order, the step, but then some people will want more. So you do the role play, and at some point you throw things like, oh, did you forget we have the year end and we need to close the thing, and so there is a stop on the development and release planning. Do we realize that we had promised that because we stopped the licensing of this thing, we need to upgrade that? And then people realize what happens on both sides. So it's more about creating a team. That's how I took it.
Yeah, I love it. And, in a way, you're almost kind of creating a kind of game there. And I think what it shows is, those kind of things, if you break them down, if you approach it from the other way, you break down into these separate elements. So if you want to build it up, then take the elements and build it up there. Yeah.
I think there's an emotional element to this that perhaps we're not playing hard enough on. Everything we talked about is the mechanics of prioritization. I wonder if there's room for a game, and I'm thinking an inspector calls, to emotionally make people aware of what their selfishness is doing to the rest of the company. Yeah. We can make very small decisions to not do something or do something that have actually quite large ramifications down the line, but because we never see them, or we never see them directly, we're not really aware of them. I wonder. And so I'm sort of looking at the branching paths card, and I'm wondering if there's some capacity to use that in a way to present people with the consequences of what they're doing in a game-like environment.
Absolutely. I mean, you can start to combo that card with all kinds of different ones. You could combo it with points and achievements. So start to give them points to represent different things that go up and down when they make their decisions. And some of those, hopefully, they can see X or Y that has an emotional impact, really going down or going up, for instance. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea.
So that ties into red teams, blue teams, and purple teams. So where the military aspects are now being brought into business, where you've got people that are out to try and get you, and you've got to think quite deviously to get around the problem. And if you're thinking that way about what someone's going to do to you, they'll be thinking about you, and that brings in the eventually you end up realizing that you've got to apply hearts and minds to get through rather than going out to attack people.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So I think we've
Thanks, Chris.
gone. Sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing with that.
Excellent. I think we've probably got enough illustration there to see how the deck works. And I want to reserve a little bit of time at the end to talk about a couple of things, including any other questions apart from the practical elements. But yeah, so keep in mind that everything we've just done there in terms of taking those two or kind of three challenges and seeing different ways to potentially solve them was just been done off the back of these titles and, you know, me inserting a little bit of my knowledge of what lies under those. You know, each of those cards has all of this extra information on about exactly how it might work to inspire more, or information about how you could combine it with others, or, you know, you could be using them in all of these different ways and combining them in these different ways suggested by the grey cards. So, you know, we've seen how it can generate things, but there's even more ways for that to happen. And keep in mind as well, I would say that you know, that's just us doing that in a few minutes now, and that's just generating the ideas. Again, you can use this in any kind of process you want. So you can test those ideas out at whatever kind of level of kind of MVP prototype or full pilot or whatever you want to, and then go back and change and adapt and so on. So, you know, I mean, I'll wind out into a more general kind of rounding off and Q&A, but is there any other questions about how that bit of it works? Is that making sense to people, how the cards generate those ideas?
Yeah. It's not so much the ideas, but the way of the timing. If you do the cards one day and have a meet the next day, a very short meet, then you get the stuff that happens in the overnight process and the system 2 thinking coming through.
Nice.
So when we're in a tense situation, we think immediate action, whereas once you consider it, you've got a better response to it, and people have usually calmed down about what happened the day before, and you get the action points straight out.
Yeah, nice. I like that. Thanks for that. It's similar to a similar idea to something someone in the community suggested about, you know, if you're a bit stuck, just choosing one card and then meditating on that until, you know, putting the deck down and then meditating on that one card until the next time you come together, and maybe an idea for using it would come to you again via that system 2 thinking. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so what we're trying to do there a little bit is show you a little bit about how the cards are intended to work, a little bit about the history, link it into some of the ways in which they might be relevant to you. You know, my aim has very much been to make sure that you get some value from this session just as it stands. But if you think the cards could be a useful addition to your toolkit, then I'll just briefly tell you about how you could buy them, etc. So they are available via my website. I'll just pop this link into the chat there. And oh, sorry, I've just seen your chat there. You can also group cards according to applicability or being subject to a given situation. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. You can pursue ways like that to kind of sift and sort the cards. Definitely, I think it's a good call. So that's a link for this. There's basically 2 ways to buy the deck. You can buy the deck only, which is just a physical deck, and the price is shown there. Or you can buy the toolkit version, which is the deck, the access to the community forum, which you can share ideas, bring your challenges, you know, talk to other users. But also into that community forum, I feed weekly guides, tips, content, deep dives into individual cards, you know, new themes, templates for using the card on Mural or Miro, things like that. And then also the digital mini version of the card. So these, where have I gone? These as not PDFs, PNGs. So you can use those on, again, Mural, Miro, or whatever the whiteboard type app that you prefer. So that's how you can buy. That's where you can buy from. And if anybody is interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn, just to talk about gamification, games-based learning, or any of the kind of things that we've talked about today, then you know, please do. If you look up Terry Pearce on LinkedIn, then I'm connected to Corrado, so you'll find me pretty easily, I'm sure.
Yeah. I already put the
oh,
link.
you did, yeah. Sorry, you did.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. So there's a tiny bit more about buying the deck there if you want to, but also, you know, we've got a few more minutes. If anyone does have any other questions at all about the deck, about related topics. Silence. Brilliant. Well, hopefully no questions means that it's all made sense. You know, if you've got any comments, thoughts, yeah, then let me know. Good stuff. Thanks, Selena. Good stuff.
Thanks, Terry.
And thanks for getting involved as well, for making an interactive session.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing this.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone, for collaborating to make the session more interesting. Let me stop the recording.
Okay.